All right. Welcome, everybody. Today, we've got a jam-packed session to talk about on the new Family First Corona Act and then on the new CARES Act and how they work together. Before we get started, I want to introduce you to everybody on our call. As you'll see names, which is helpful. First I'm Eric Couch. I'm the CEO and founder of Provision Brokerage. We do retirement planning, work nationwide. We have Stephen May in the bottom left corner. He is a partner at May and Habauchi. Am I close?
That's right. That's
okay,
right.
Good. Top right corner, we have Ryan Friend, and he's a senior VP at Liberty Capital Bank here in Dallas. And then in the bottom right corner, we have Chris McNeil, and Chris is a partner at Block Garden and McNeil. And we have an attorney, we have a CPA, we have a banker, and we're going to discuss a lot of different questions and how they relate to you and me. We're going to come at it from a couple different perspectives, right? So we're going to come at it as, how does it impact an employee? How does it impact an employer? What are the differences between the CARES Act and the Family First Act? So a little bit about the CARES Act. That was a bipartisan act that just went into effect this last Friday. And it's $2.2 trillion that's going into help the U.S. economy while we're all self-isolated at home, right? But part of what brought about the CARES Act, because at least from my perspective, and these guys may have a different one, and that's totally okay. But the CARES Act is more so focused on the employer, where the Family First Act is focused on the employee, right? And each person's going to have a chance to talk, and we're going to take some questions. So if you have some questions, let us know. We'll put questions up on the board as we go. But then to get us kicked off, before we get into the CARES Act, I'd like Chris, our attorney, to just walk us through the Family First Act and kind of how does that work and how does that benefit the employee, and then what was the impact to the employer that kind of jumped us into the CARES. So Chris, go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you, Eric, for setting this up, and welcome everybody. So the Family First Act, or the full name is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It was passed by Congress, signed into law on March 18th, and it goes into effect tomorrow on April 1st. So several key components of that. The first section is what they call the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. And it applies to now employers that have less than 500 employees are now required to provide their employees with up to 10 weeks of paid family medical leave time. The second part of the Families First Act is an Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act that requires businesses with fewer than 500 employees to offer paid sick leave to those who meet criteria associated with this current public health emergency. The third part of that is it gives employers tax credits for the paid sick leave and the paid family medical leave. And then it provided $1 billion in supplemental funding for state unemployment programs and gave state governments some additional flexibility when it comes to workers needing unemployment insurance.
So some of the caveats, I know as a business owner, what caught my attention on the Family First Act is it's great for employees because, as one of the things I'd read, it gives 8 weeks of paid time off if your kids aren't able to go to school and you have to be, their new teacher, right? With all the means of, the principal's office with their student class, right? So it does that. And then there's the 2 weeks paid time off that could come in at the beginning. So as an employer, I was going, oh wow. So I've got to potentially pay for 12 weeks of vacation, or not vacation. Sorry, totally wrong. But if somebody has coronavirus or somebody just can't go to work because their kids staying home from school because they've shut down all the schools, at least in Dallas and most of Texas and the country now, that could be a real impact. So as an employer, how do you do with reducing income and then paying, I guess, two-thirds of their income, up to 200 a day, that caps out at 10 grand. I'm like, that's a chunk of money, especially when you're not creating as much income as normal. And third, they're not working, right? So we're not getting the income, we're still paying, and they're not working. So you have to come up with another way to generate the deal. So that was a concerning thing as an employer. And initially it said, they'll cut back on they'll help with the payroll, but it was like, you still have to have the money. So huge benefit to employees. 2 weeks sick pay.
Hey, Eric, I have lost my audio.
Okay. So I hear.
I still have you.
Okay. So Stephen, while Chris is getting audio, kind of what am I missing here or add to it on the family?
Well, the one that is a big concern, I guess kind of the good news on the 12-week program, the first 10 days of that program, the employee it's either unpaid or the employee would use their built up sick time or vacation time. Then the additional 10 weeks, as you were saying, you would get paid at 2/3 of your normal salary, up to $200 a day, but the government would step in and give the business owner a credit. And so you wouldn't necessarily be out the full $10,000. You really shouldn't be out anything other than you'd have to front the cash flow up front to make the payroll, and you get that money back whenever you file your payroll tax returns.
So one of the questions that came up, and hopefully, everybody's working from home, so there's a little bit of bandwidth issues these days. So Chris is going to come back, but one of the questions, I have for, Chris and Stephen both is, what's the, how does the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, right? Family First Act. How does that impact someone who is, let's say they live off tips, right? Or they're contract labor, or there's something like that, how does that work? Y'all, is there insight on that yet?
Well, there's not necessarily a lot of guidance on this yet. The Department of Labor will probably need to come out with some regulations. Normally there's a period of time that those have to be posted before they can go into effect. And some of those time limitations may have to be waived by executive order or otherwise. But part-time employees, they are eligible. It's based on as a general rule, the average number of hours they work during any 2-week period. Now, if you're an independent contractor or consultant to a business, you do not qualify for this sick leave and for this medical leave under the Family First Act, but you may be eligible to qualify under your own company or under your own umbrella. Of course, problem is you don't have necessarily revenues coming in to support yourself and give yourself that leave. Right. With respect to people who work only off of tips or something of that nature, I have not yet seen that guidance.
So, and then also on the credit if you're self-employed and you have your own business, you would get a credit if you end up having to spend 12 weeks taking care of a child and not being able to work, or if you get coronavirus or have to be self-quarantined, you would get a credit whenever you file your tax return next April. And that's whenever you'd get your credit personally.
Yeah. Other thoughts on the Family First Act before we get going into the CARES Act and stimulus package and some of that stuff. Again, let's just a quick recap. Benefits of the Family First Act to the employee. Somebody hit that for me real quick.
Well, the benefits to the employee are up to 10 weeks of paid leave. The first 2 weeks are without pay, and then after that, at 2/3 of their salary, up to $200 a day or $10,000 total. They're also entitled to additional paid sick leave of up to 2 weeks, 80 hours, and they're guaranteed their job when they come back for most employers.
Mm-hmm.
But on the long program, that's only available if you can't work from home and if you have a child under 18 that doesn't have daycare, doesn't have school. Like if you have a long illness from coronavirus, that does not kick in there. It's only for that one situation. So that you kind of got to watch out for that.
Yeah.
But the credits will pay for everything. The wages aren't subject to Social Security tax for the business or the employer. It is subject to the Medicare tax, and then the business will get a credit for their portion of the Medicare tax. And so it shouldn't cost the business in the long run. Overall, they'll just have to front the money until they can get the credit back.
Okay. So business, it shouldn't cost them. Initially, there was concern that it would, and then it was discovered, the 100% deduction on payroll. Now that we've talked about that, let's go into the CARES Act because it offers a lot more relief to the business owner. Stephen, would you like to give us a little rundown on the CARES Act?
Okay, I'll kind of hit the highlights from the tax code.
Yeah, we won't steal all the glory from our superstar in the top right.
Yeah, our superstar. Basically, what you take away from the CARE Act, the main thing is if you're in business, if you have employees, or if you're self-employed under 500 people, call your banker yesterday, and you're going to be lighting up their phones. But as far as for individuals that are still employees, as there's a little bit of relief. There's the $1,200 stimulus payment per person. It's if you have AGI of 75,000 or less single, or $150,000 or less married, and then $500 per dependent under 17. And if you'll get that based on your 2018 or 2019 tax return, whatever you filed. You might want to be careful if you're under the limit in 2018 before you file your 2019 and over. You may hurt your stimulus payment. The good news is there is no clawback. And then if your income in 18 or 19 was over the 150,000 or 75,000 AGI, and 2020 is going to be under due to this virus, then you would get your extra stimulus next year whenever you file your tax return. The thing for the retirement planners out there, and your elderly, there's no RMDs for 2020. If you have somebody that's impacted with COVID, now this isn't for everybody, but this is if you're directly impacted with COVID, you can take out up to $100,000 out of your IRA without the withdrawal penalty. You still owe the income tax, and then you also have the ability to pay that $100,000 back, or you can pay the income tax over 3 years. Let's see, there's a 300. This is peanuts, but it's still nice for charitable donations. You can give up to $300 above the line deduction instead of having to meet the high threshold for itemized deductions. There's some adjustments to the AGI limits on charitable deductions. There's some assistance on student loan payments for those of you with HSAs. You can now, it's kind of back to the pre-Obamacare rules where you can use your HSA for over-the-counter medications. For businesses that have high interest, I think it was about $1 million. You had some interest limitation; those have been waived. There's some adjustment, or for qualified restaurant improvements, there's some changes to the code where you can get the 100% bonus depreciation one thing for employers, it's a trap in my opinion, but it's still available for current cash flow. For the 6.2% Social Security tax, you can extend those payments over 2021 and 22. I would be very careful with those. That's just another where you don't want to get bit in 2022. Let me see. What else did I have?
So some of my main takeaway here is, $100,000 out of your IRA without penalty, right? So if you need it, and
only if you're impacted by COVID.
Right.
Right. So you can't just take 100,000.
But there's a handful of different ways where you may be impacted. It could be right because it can be your business is materially impacted.
Right. You just want to be careful with that one. It's not automatic.
Well, and it's 100% taxable, so it's not. As a retirement financial guy, I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't recommend tapping into your IRA or qualified money because it's all taxable. But if you have to, they're at least waiving the 10% penalty. But it's still, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, it's still taxable.
It is taxable. You have the option of spreading that tax over 3 years.
Yeah.
Or paying it back. So you can kind of use it as a loan. I guess another thing that's kind of a big deal with the 2017 Tax Act, they suspended net operating loss carrybacks. And the CARES Act does allow you need to look at your 2018 tax return. If you had a net operating loss, you can now carry back your 2018 tax return. So contact your tax advisor to how to deal with that. That may be some money that would be freed up right away, and you can carry back, I guess, any losses from 18, 19, or 2020. You can carry those back 5 years. And for 2000 until 2021, there was a limit on the carry forward per year at 80%, and that's waived for 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
So those are some things that you need to talk to with your advisor about.
So there's a lot of stuff going on.
That's the highlights on the tax stuff, but the real meat and potatoes is that PPP loan.
Right.
And that's where the good stuff is, and that's be a huge windfall and saving grace for a lot of small businesses, in my opinion.
Okay, so one of the questions that came up here, let me see if we can do this. Can you take loans on your 401k limits? Is there any kind of information on that?
The new there's expanded amount. You can take up to 100,000 on your 401k loan this year, and so that's something that's new. They've increased that substantially, but that is a trap because if you leave your job or you end up getting laid off, you would have to repay that. So you have to be careful. Be careful with 401k loans. Those are something I generally don't like and don't recommend. But when you're in a bind, you're in a bind.
Right.
Go see Ryan first.
Do what?
I say go borrow the money from the bank first.
Yeah.
Before hitting your IRAs.
Well, there's options for that. So, borrowing money from 401k IRA, borrowing money from the bank. Now, we had under the CARES Act, and now you mentioned the PPP loan, and make sure to include the third P in there. But and under one of the things that was really concerning to employers under the Family First is having to front the money for if somebody needs to be out for 10 to 12 weeks or more, right?
Right.
But and it's like, okay, you get this payroll deduction, but under the CARES Act, it actually turns the tables quite a bit to help the employer be able to fund that, right? So let's go through this PPP. Is it a loan? Is it a grant? Walk us through that.
Ryan, do you want to do that or?
Sure, happy to. Nice to join everybody, and we have been following very closely the developments over the past week as Senate and Congress and the President signed into law the CARES Act, and specifically the Paycheck Protection Loan Program that's in the CARES Act that is available now to small businesses all over the country. And so it has been a fast and furious download of that information, over the past 3 or 4 business days as things have been trickling out in the Act. And so I'll start off by saying, just first and foremost, banks across the country are waiting on the official guidance of the program, the rules, the regulations, the application process, all those details. We're waiting on them from the SBA. And it's funny, as we're talking right now, I just saw an email come through that we have now received that guidance from the Department of Treasury and the SBA.
Really?
And so I don't know if it's complete guidance or if it's just part of it, but I know as we speak, our analyst team is going through that and seeing what that means as far as us being able to roll it out. But I'll walk through kind of the details or the highlights of the plan and what we're recommending right now.
Okay.
There's 2 broad SBA loan programs out there that are available to small businesses to help right now. One is called the EIDL program, or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and that's a program that's actually been around for a while.
That's the SBA loan that was just the link that was put out a couple of weeks ago, right?
That's right. It's a program that's been in existence for a while. I don't know exactly how long, but that's new about that program, other than a few nuances that they've changed specifically due to coronavirus. And then what's new is the PPP that was approved as part of the CARES Act. And so there are 2 different loan programs. They're both administered by the SBA, but they have different rules and really were designed for different purposes. I'll talk about the EIDL program a little bit first, and because it's been out the longest. But it was really designed to help businesses that were impacted by disasters, many times natural disasters. So think about hurricanes. Think about, for those of us in North Texas, the tornado that came through Dallas this fall in October. A business that building gets damaged, or some of their equipment gets destroyed, or they have to close until they can reopen and rebuild. That's really what that loan program was designed for.
Right.
So the way that works is when a disaster occurs, the government fields an application from the governor of the state in which it occurred, and they request approval for that area to be declared a disaster area. And once that's approved, then all the businesses in the declared disaster area are eligible to apply for the loan. And so you can borrow up to $2 million. You can use the loan proceeds for working capital, payroll, accounts payable, inventory, equipment to repair a building. But it is a up to 30-year term note at, I believe, a maximum interest rate of 3.75% right now. And so it's a wonderful loan program, but it was really designed to help businesses get through a disaster and rebuild. And so coronavirus is a qualifying disaster, and all the governors around the country have applied
So EIDL
approved for their states to be a disaster area. So people all across the country can apply for these loans, and many of them have. It is not administered through banks. It's direct through the SBA. So to complete the application, go to sba.gov. There's a link for the EIDL loans. And then from there, you can complete an application and upload documents directly. And then an SBA loan officer will contact you and walk you through the process and underwrite you and get you approved if you're eligible. A couple things to note about that.
So real quick before you jump into that, right? One of the things that's come out, right, is with the CARES Act is it's an alternative to the EIDL, the disaster loan, right? So the loan available through the CARES is an alternative. It's not, you don't get both, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then
And that's my.
the other
Mhm.
the other is, you know, and we'll go into some of the more details and stuff, but with the EIDL, one of the reason I was told, at least and read, that they came out with the CARES loan is if you do the EIDL, you have to go through the SBA, and they're going to get overwhelmed because it has to go through them, right? So there's a,
That's
I mean, it's a good sized group, but it has to go through their funnel. Whereas under the CARES Act alone, it can go through any bank. So you're not waiting nearly as long. So we're going to get into way more pros and cons than that. But that's one that's been brought up a few times under this new EIDL versus CARES Act. So go ahead. Sorry.
That's correct, Eric. Absolutely. And so just a few other high level details about the EIDL disaster loans. The collateral is not required. In other words, a loan won't be denied because a business doesn't have collateral to pledge. But if there's any collateral available to be pledged, then the SBA will take that as collateral. And so that's one thing to note about that. But in the businesses, when the underwriting process, the SBA will determine their affordability for the loan and how long they can repay it based on the profits of their business.
Mhm.
And so they will customize a repayment plan based on each business's ability to service the debt. So it's not a one size fits all approach. It's business to business specific. But it can be a really nice option for businesses that feel like they're going to recover from this pretty quick and they want some term debt, and they have a variety of needs, not just payroll. Like if they have inventory or other accounts payable and vendors that they need to pay,
Right.
and other bills that otherwise would not be as easily accessed through this new PPP program in the CARES Act. The EIDL program could be worth really considering
Yeah.
for them. So it's a great program. I think it's something to consider right now. It's something to consider in the future, but it's out there. And yeah, to your point, Eric, your question, a lot of people have been calling in asking, well, wait a second, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when all this was happening,
Right.
we got in early, we applied for the EIDL loan, and now we're hearing that it makes us ineligible for the PPP loan. And so there's a lot of concern around that. And it's my understanding on what we've read and the guidance so far that the SBA is working with people on that.
Mhm.
They do not want double dipping, but at the same time, they will allow you to access PPP funds if you had already applied and been granted a loan and PPP wasn't available or you did not know about it. Then you have the ability to then either pivot or carve out part of the loan and put it over into the PPP bucket, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So there's still more details on the guidance of how that works, but generally speaking, there is an avenue for folks that were early out on the EIDL loans
Right.
and got approved. That does not mean that they are out of luck to be able to access PPP funds. And so there'll be more details forthcoming on how that's going to work.
Right, because the big thing between the two, and any of y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but the big thing between the two is the disaster relief does not have any forgiveness of anything that you get in a loan, whereas the CARES Act PPP does have some partial forgiveness, and that's where we'll go into how they're doing the payroll and how they're counting that. We'll let one of y'all address that maybe next, but that's one of the main differences, correct?
That's correct. Absolutely. The EIDL does not have a forgiveness feature. It's money that you are required to pay back. And the calculation for determining what amount of loan that you get calculated differently. Basic EIDL broader. They look at your working capital expenses for a year. And then from there, they calculate an average monthly working capital need for the business. And then you're able to borrow up to 4 to 6 times that number.
Yeah.
So if you use a midpoint, you can borrow up to 5 times your average monthly working capital need in the business. And that includes payroll, rent, accounts payable, other items that a business will need to operate. And so it's a broader program that a business can access. So anyway, what I'll do now is just transition over to the Paycheck Protection Loan Program as part of the CARES Act, which is what everybody wants to know about.
Right, that's what they're waiting for.
Yeah.
This
So
is the Jerry Maguire "Show Me the Money" movement of the Facebook Live.
Certainly in my career, in our career, we've never experienced anything like this before, and so it is certainly unprecedented. But basically, this was designed in the CARES Act to get money in the hands of business owners, so they can pay their people and keep them on payroll over this time while we kind of wait out this coronavirus and hopefully get on the other side of it. So that's the number one goal of it, is really to help with payroll. And so it's also administered by the SBA, but it's not done direct. It's done through banks around the country. And to be eligible, a bank must be a certified SBA lender. And many banks are already. Many banks aren't, and some non-bank lenders aren't, who have also applied to be certified lenders. And they're going to need, the government's going to need all the help they can get to get this $350 billion out. It's a significant amount of money. People need it quickly, and it's going to be a scramble as all this comes down. But basically, you've got to apply through a bank, and we'll be able to issue out this guidance and specify now the specifics of what's needed in the application process. But the way they have a basic calculation for how much you can borrow, and you can use those funds really for anything that you want. However, if you want a portion of the loan amount that you get forgiven, or all of it forgiven, there are a few eligible expenses that you have to prove that you use the money for in order for part of the loan or all of the loan to be forgiven from repayment. And so the way that the loan amount is calculated is it's basically pretty simple. It's they look at your trailing 12 months payroll, and they calculate an average monthly payroll expense for the business, and that includes wages, commissions, health insurance, retirement contributions, et cetera, that are part of payroll. There's some exceptions from that as well, but they calculate a monthly, an average monthly payroll expense, and then you can borrow up to 2.5 times that amount a business can.
Now, is that a loan or is that a grant?
It's a loan. It's definitely a loan. You'll sign a promissory note. You're going to assign some documents that say you invest as the business owner to knowing what some of the details of this program are. And it's not immediately forgiven up front. I think there's a lot of misinformation about that. You're going to have to come back to the bank later and submit some documentation, which the bank will then in turn submit to the SBA for approval to forgive the loan or forgive a part of the loan. And so that's what we'll be preparing clients for, so they understand what's required of them in order to get forgiveness.
Right.
And the reason they put those in there is, they want this money to go back into the hands of employees who have been laid off or are getting ready to be laid off. So if a business owner gets this money and then turns around and buys a new car or buys, some inventory or equipment for the business instead of rehiring or continuing to pay their team, then they're not going to get the loan forgiven, and they're going to be required to continue to make payments on that loan. So, So anyway, the cost of the loan is 4% fixed interest rate. Any amount that's not forgiven will be repaid, over a 10-year period. But a couple things to note: there's no collateral for these loans. They're made on an unsecured basis. Collateral, even if it's available, will not be taken, and there's no recourse required from the business owner. Those two features were done to allow for this to be able to be provided quickly. It takes time to perfect on collateral. It takes time to structure guarantees, and so all that money needs to move out quickly, and so that's why they stripped out those requirements.
Okay. So what's now in addition, so let me take a step back. So on the part that's forgivable, that is the phrase that I've heard over and over again is it's 2.5 times payroll, right? Which is what you
That's right.
said, and then that can
Well,
cover.
that's how they calculate the amount you can borrow.
Right.
That's a different calculation from what is forgiven. The amount is the amount that is forgiven is any portion of the loan that is used to cover payroll, rent, business utilities. So everything from the electricity bill to internet and phone for the business, and interest, mortgage interest, not principal, but mortgage interest. So those are the things that if you can prove the money was used for those items by just documentation and receipts, then you're going to have that amount forgiven.
Okay, so I've got, and then now in addition to that, under the CARES Act, can't you apply for like the same $2 million? It's just that amount's not forgivable at like a 4% interest rate? Or is that not right?
Good question. There's typically when someone comes to apply, the business applies for a loan or a person applies for a loan, they apply for an amount. They're
Right.
like, this is different. You're not applying for a specific amount. We're going to calculate what you're eligible for and submit that. And that's just purely based on the documentation you're able to provide. And so you'll be told what you can borrow. And then you won't be told what you can use the money for. But if you want it forgiven, you should be using it to cover payroll, rent, utilities, etc. And then you'll be eligible to apply for forgiveness at a later date, which is we expect roughly 8 weeks.
But one thing too, can you kind of go over like the self-employment income for the business owners? Because it appears that you can include up to $100,000 for your payroll cost of that. Is that how y'all are interpreting that?
That's right, absolutely. So there are some nuances in the definition and calculation of a company's average monthly payroll expense. So let's say a company has $100,000 a month of payroll, and of that $100,000 a month, $25,000 a month of it is paid to employees who earn over $100,000. And so they're going to cap, in the calculation of average monthly payroll, they're going to cap those making more than $100,000 at $100,000.
Yeah.
So that goes into the formula of calculating average monthly payroll. And then once that average monthly payroll number is solidified, then you can borrow up to 2.5 times that. So that's just purely the calculation. A good point, Stephen, on some of the details on how they calculate that.
So,
because I guess the way I was looking at it was, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that even the owners and self-employment owners, they could be eligible for about $20,000 and change towards that payroll cost if they make more than $100,000. Is that how you interpret it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. So we've had some questions about that, and again, everything I say, I want to put with the disclaimer that pending confirmation of official guidance from the SBA.
Right. Yeah, because you said during this call, information just came across, right?
Yeah, like it just came across.
They had 2 weeks on Friday.
Yeah. So, but based on the highlights and what we've known, up till about 30 minutes ago, an owner of a business is eligible to be included in the monthly payroll calculation if they're on payroll. There are going to be some circumstances that I think potentially could be outliers. Like for instance, if let's say a business is an S corporation and the owner doesn't actually take a salary, but takes their payment from the business in the form of distributions.
Right.
They most likely
You're not S corporation.
No, but I take distributions. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have self-employment income.
Yeah.
And partnerships kind of have the same issue.
Yeah. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
people like me that are, LLC, but they're a sole proprietor where they're going, how does this benefit me? Right.
Right. We're uncertain. We're uncertain if those folks who are not on payroll, like a business owner or somebody else, will be eligible or not from this if they own the business. And I think it gets back to, as Stephen mentioned, the payroll tax issue. And so that's uncertain. We're really looking for the guidance on that. To determine what they'll be eligible for. And so that's a potential carve out that it could be problematic for a lot of business owners.
Right.
Well, there's a
Sorry, hold
document.
on.
There's a document from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that seems to make the way I interpret it that as self-employed business owners, we'd probably be eligible for it. I don't know if you've seen that one yet, Ryan.
Hey guys, hold on just a minute. I have a loan closing I have to work on just for a second. So they're expecting a wire.
We can come back to you.
I'll be back with you here shortly.
Yes. So Stephen, let's talk about and Chris, right? Well, before we go on to any other questions, is there any recaps? And I know we've got some people that have asked some questions that we can address those too. But what questions or what would you like to readdress or just solidify or that brought up on your end?
Now, most of my questions really relate to the PPP loans and the information that we're waiting really to hear from that. And there's probably another question I have for Ryan. Maybe if you have maybe 2 or 3 different businesses, are you eligible for that $100,000 in each business? Are you capped at 1? Seems like there's a lot of questions I don't think they know the answer to yet.
Yeah, I don't know that they do. I don't know that they do. And that's where, some of this stuff is just, we're waiting on. I've been laughing because, the whole world's like, every company that I've ever given my email address has been telling me how they're responding to COVID-19, right? And we've all been bombarded with those emails from, the donut place that I think my kids went to a couple years ago sends me an email like twice a week. And what's funny is in the last 24 hours, every bank that's ever had my email has sent me something saying, here's the updates and here's how it's going. And we still don't have information yet, which is funny that, Ryan said some information just came across. But all of this is happening in real time. That's the reality. All 4 of us didn't sleep much this weekend studying what's going on. Stephen, what would I'm trying to think of kind of a next question to go on of I know one of the things that you brought up is, if you get some of this money, are you going to have to pay it back?
You're talking about the stimulus money.
Right. So that's the individual. Every adult gets up to $1,200, or is that what you're referring to?
$1,200. I guess if you fully qualify, you'll get $1,200 for you, your spouse, and then $500 for every child you have, every dependent you have under the age of 17. I guess I had one client this week that had dependent children in college, and they're like, "Do I get the extra $500?" And the answer to that is no, unless they end up being not a dependent in 2020. Then they would get that full stimulus check when they filed their tax return next April.
Right. So
I mean, it's really an advance on a 2020 additional child tax credit.
Let's go into a couple other questions here. One of the questions that came up is Elizabeth was asking, what is the $10,000 advance on the disaster loan? I've heard different things on it. So can either of you guys address that one?
I really can't. I've heard the same thing, but I've heard that the first 10,000 may be a grant, but I don't know that for certain. That's probably, unless you know, that's probably a question for Ryan.
Okay.
It probably is. I'm just using my first research tool of first resort, which is Google, and it says that the SBA is making microloans of $10,000 advances against potential future loans for immediate needs through a streamlined process. It looks like that is part of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the EIDL. So that's the standard loan program that doesn't have potential loan forgiveness, but has very favorable lending terms, but would include collateral. So Ryan will have to give us a little bit more when he gets back on that. But it looks like that is something that's available under the EIDL program. It was already in place.
Okay, so next question that came up is from Cord, and that is, can an essential business still utilize the PPP funds while continuing to operate?
Everything I've seen says that they can. I haven't seen anything that says that you can't. So that's why I think it's a big windfall. They really want employers not to lay off folks and keep the unemployment line full. I mean, it was, I think, over 3 million last week. And I think they want to get that number down and keep people on the payroll. I mean, if you're paying them and you don't, if you're not in shelter in place and you can have them work, they can, do filing. You have people do your filing, paint your building. You can utilize them. They don't have to be at home. I mean, they can still be working for you and being productive for your company.
Right. And that is a concern, especially back to the family first, right? Of needing to pay the 12 weeks of paid time off. What came of that is it said, well, it takes effect April 2nd, right? So you're going to be, as an employer, a lot of employers saw that and said, I've got to have the funds to pay 12 weeks off. If somebody says, my kid can't go to school, so I can't work, which is anybody that has school age kids. So, it's like, we're going to have massive layoffs. And that's what started to happen. I've gotten several calls this week of people saying, we had a friend that said, I've worked for this company 18 years and got laid off on Monday with 51 other people, right? And that's kind of becoming the norm. So the reason for, this 10,000 or the PPP funds like that is to tell employers, hey, don't lay people off, keep them on staff. And we will, as long as you use that money towards paying the staff, paying utilities, paying rent, then that can be forgiven, right? Now we're still getting more information comes out every day. Ryan's back. Hopefully somebody has a funded loan. But yeah, so Ryan, what we're talking about is, can an essential business still utilize the PPP funds?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
And then another question that came up while you were out is, and we wanted to throw you under the bus for it. So, what is the 10,000 advance on disaster loan? Because there's been all kinds of rumors, right? And how's this different?
Yeah.
Or is it different than the PPP funds? So
I'm not sure on the $10,000 advance on the disaster loan. I'd have to double check on what the provision there is and let everybody know.
Okay. Again, we're getting new stuff every day.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So another question that came up, Chris is asking, what if you do both? What if you pay yourself a W-2 and take distributions? How does that fall under the PPP in this scenario?
Yeah, question. It's our understanding right now that amount, just the W-2 that you're paying yourself as a business owner would go into the average monthly payroll calculation, which would then go into the determining the amount that you could borrow. So the distributions in that case would be excluded from the calculation to determine your loan amount.
Yeah.
Well, and also it sounds like if in that scenario that taxpayer would be an S corporation, and so
Yep.
even for the part 2 where it talks about self-employed income, the distributions in the S corporations would not be self-employment income. Only what you pay yourself on the W-2 would be.
That's exactly right.
And that,
Yeah,
but that's
so-
where I think there's some clarification needed for partners and partnerships, because by definition, partners aren't supposed to get W-2s. They get guaranteed payments or distributions, and they pay self-employment income on all the income of the business.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan, I know you are working on a checklist, and you're still waiting on more information, but how does somebody find out if their business is eligible?
Great question. We have the eligibility requirements on our checklist, which we can send out to anybody that requests it. There's
so if you
also
want
great
notes,
eligibility.
that's going to be part of our notes. So if you want the notes, just type notes into the chat, post a comment and say notes, and we'll send that to you.
Also, if somebody wants to look up something quick online, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a really good summary, and part 1 of that summary just lists all the eligible businesses, but the definition is really, really broad. It is any business in the United States with fewer than 500 employees, or NACES Code 72. So they included basically restaurant franchisors, franchisees, and the hotel business or the hospitality business. So let's say a business owner owns 10 hotels, and each hotel has 25 employees. Each of those hotels would be classified as their own business for the determination of PPP and would be eligible, as opposed to if you added it all together and it exceeded 500, they would be kicked out. So in that case, they'll go by property to property. So that's where a lot of franchisees that own multiple locations, or hospitality companies that own multiple hotels, they can still be included in this, which is really nice.
Can I ask like a really hypothetical question, like where you've got a franchisee that may have 25 hotels, and if you're paying yourself a salary like over $100,000 in each of them, would you be qualified for $8,300 per hotel?
I don't know. That's one of those we're going to have to look at the guidance and see. There's going to be there's going to be so many, I feel like, outliers like that where this bill had to be produced so fast. One of my concerns is that there's just going to be so many things they weren't able to think about. They're going to be gray areas, and so I hope this guidance provides more clarity on a lot of them, but we'll just see.
Yeah. How quick can people expect to get money? Like, let's say you go through the process, right? And we still don't know exactly what the process is. We're getting a lot closer, but is there any idea on when businesses or individuals under the stimulus, either one, can start expecting to get C funds?
Well, if this is one of the most common questions, and unfortunately, we don't have a specific answer for you. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the street.
Yesterday, we have it yesterday.
One of my clients was even telling me this morning that Secretary Mnuchin said on Fox News this morning that by Friday, well, you know, we we really don't know. We expect that we're coming up at the bank for processing these applications quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So getting the information from a business borrower and packaging that information and turning it around same day or overnight to the SBA for approval for funding. What we don't know is how long is that going to take to hear back from them, and then once we
Right.
hear back from them and get approval, then how long is it going to take to get funding into your account? So we just don't know. But I can say, you know, we're at Liberty Capital Bank. We're a local boutique business bank in DFW, but you know, the big regional banks and national banks, you know, we're hearing that most of them are automating this process through their websites, and so a client will literally be able to go to the website, click a link, complete their application online, upload the documents, and
Mm-hmm.
hit send, and then it's going to make its way internally through that approval process. So it's going to move, I would say, pretty quick, but we just don't know beyond that right now.
And
Well,
then
it's
I
gonna
guess
move-
one thing on documents that I talked to my local banker about, he said, what, and I asked him, I said, what do my clients need? And he said they need, if they're incorporated or LLC, they need their certificate of formation, their SS4, a copy of their last filed tax return, and then get their payroll records for whatever the period that's going to be, I guess that pro rata or not that payroll period that for them for the calculate the 2.5 months.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So to the time question, the biggest thing we've been telling folks right now is we don't know about so much of what they want to know, but we do know it's time to get ready and get prepared. So on our checklist currently is exactly what Steven said: photocopy of driver's license of the owner, certificate of formation of the business. You need to prove you are in business before February 15th, 2020. You need to be able to prove how many employees you had so they can determine that you're under the 500 threshold. You need to show documentation of your annual trailing 12 months payroll so they can calculate the formula. And you need to show your rent payments, if you have a lease, your utility costs, just all the documents that they're going to need, that we're going to need to calculate the formula, have those ready to go.
So anything else you want to cover on the CARES real quick, and then I'm going to jump over to some legal questions, and then we'll, if there's any questions in the comments section. But anything else on this? Okay. So bottom line on the CARES and the PPP and all of that, you know, the bottom line of what everybody's wanting to find out is, you know, show me the money. And how does that work? You know, how do we take care of the employee? How do we keep the employer in business? Because if the employer goes out of business, there is no job for the employee, right? And that's been my concern from day one, is I'm like, okay, the coronavirus, COVID-19 is serious, right? People are dying, and that's not something we take lightly. But my concern is, you know, as we're flattening the curve for COVID-19, how do we also flatten the curve for unemployments and layoffs and bankruptcies and businesses that aren't taking on income right now, especially businesses that aren't considered essential? They've had to, close their doors for the time being in retail. How do they keep in business so that employees have a job to go back to, right? Or for me, you know, how do we make sure that there's still a middle market, a middle class when this is all said and done? So, you know, that's what all this is trying to do is the family first, you know, protects the employee, and it made some provisions for the employer, but then the CARES Act really protects the employer and makes it where they can provide for their employees. So a couple questions that that we wanted to cover, you know, from the employer perspective. And Chris, I'd like you to respond to this. Is, you know, what are the duties of an employer to protect employees against COVID-19?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I guess I should say for the record, I am an attorney. I'm not necessarily your attorney unless I have the privilege of being your counsel on something from a prior relationship. So everyone, yes, I am Eric's attorney. So, I certainly advise everybody to be out in touch and consult with their attorneys while we're going through this situation, and things are rapidly changing. But as a general rule, if you'd asked me a month ago, hey, is all of Dallas Fort Worth going to be under a shelter at home order where everybody has to stay at home unless they're in an essential business? That's something that none of us ever would have expected or anticipated. This is really unprecedented for even our grandparents and great grandparents' lifetime. There's been nothing like this in over 100 years, and certainly not in today's technological world that we're used to. So it's unprecedented times. But yes, even for those of you who are running essential businesses and do have people coming to work, I mean, under OSHA and state guidelines, you generally do have a duty to provide a safe workplace for your employees. What does this mean? Does this mean that you're guaranteeing that your employees, if they come to work, will not be exposed to coronavirus? Not necessarily. But if you do run an essential business and you do have employees coming to your workplace or going to a workplace to show up for work, you do have to take reasonable precautions to try to safeguard them from getting infected in the course of their work. So, for example, set up barriers and set up protocols so that to minimize any interaction with the public, and so that any interactions with the public are done in a way to minimize any potential exposure. For people who are working in office place, make sure that there's proper distancing between employees. Employees minimize their interaction with each other, that there's sanitizers and cleaners available everywhere there can be. If someone is sick, they should stay home. They should see their medical provider. They should not come to work until they've been cleared by a doctor. In this instance, better safe than sorry. So OSHA has some guidelines that they published with respect to outbreaks in general. But yes, you do have to use common sense and then some to try to protect against employees, even in essential businesses, getting exposed and getting infected.
All right, so let's jump to the next question, and that is again for Chris. Does it excuse my company from its contractual obligations? Do I have to keep paying rent, especially if I'm not in the building because I'm working from home?
And that's a
whoops, we lost Chris. You're just gonna have to wait, folks. There we go.
Hey guys.
Yeah, you froze there for a minute. We've lost Chris. So, do I have to pay my obligation? I'm going to give
guys,
you.
I'm going to have to drop off here in just a couple of minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up here. So I think Chris is having some connectivity issues, but you are expected, and that's what some of this stuff can cover: rent, cover employees, cover stuff like that. Okay, let's jump back into questions, and then we will. Will we use? Let's see. Will we use our full mortgage payment or just interest portion? I'm not exactly sure. Stephen answered interest.
And it's not on your residence; it's your business mortgage, not your personal residence.
Yeah. So,
if your business has a mortgage
is
on a building it owns, or other term loan, you can use money from the PPP loan to pay your interest on those loans, and then that will be an eligible loan use to be forgiven when you apply for forgiveness.
Okay. And then in the similar type, will we use our full mortgage payment when it comes to, office? Well,
I was just clarifying.
Yeah. Okay, and then back to Chris where we had that, and then we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, sorry about that, Eric. Somebody tried to dial in. It threw my system for a loop. So that's a question I'm getting from a lot of clients these days. You know, that if especially retailers, restaurants, if the the local or state government has shut down their operations, other than perhaps takeout for restaurants, and even those restaurants are fortunate to be doing an eighth of the business they were a month ago with dine-in business. And, are they excused from honoring their contractual obligations? Are they excused from paying their rent? Are they excused from paying mortgages on commercial property? As a general rule, of course, you need to read the contract. But, I can tell you, having reviewed and drafted many of those documents are typically drafted to protect the landlord or to protect the lender. And, you may have one it may excuse your ability to be open, or your requirement that you be open for business at different times. But as a general rule, most of those contracts are not going to excuse you from paying rent, from honoring your monetary obligations, from paying rent, from making mortgage payments, from things of that nature. And so that obligation continues, which is why this stimulus funding is so important. Other companies that are in a supply or vendor type context, and supposed to deliver X widgets every week on the week like clockwork, or provide so many types and hours of services on a recurring basis. You again want to check your contract to see if they have what's called a force majeure clause that excuses
Right.
performance when something that's out of your control or out of your reasonable control prohibits you from otherwise fulfilling the obligations that you're required to fulfill. So the devil's in the detail in lots of those types of contracts, but as a general rule, when it comes to leases, when it comes to banks and mortgages, and other types of loans, these types of external circumstances don't contractually excuse you from having to comply with those requirements. Again, we're unprecedented times. I think we're going to see a lot of grace and from people in all sorts of different types of business relationships, because we're only going to get through this working together, instead of everybody trying to just stake out what's theirs and guard it selfishly. But we have not seen in our lifetimes anything that has this type of impact on the business world and business contracts like we're seeing today.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts from anybody on the panel?
Call your banker.
I would just, yeah.
Call your banker.
I would just say is, as a banker, we're gearing up to really help support our community as best as we can through this. And just I would encourage everybody to read what's out there on the program, get prepared, so that you can move quickly when the green light turns on, and then hope just be as patient as you can. Which is tough right now for everybody, needs it quickly, but we're going to move as quick as we're able. So.
Yeah. If you need a business attorney, Chris is in Dallas. All of these guys are in Texas. Stephen was in Dallas. He's in Sweetwater now, but he's still in Texas. So great business CPA, or Ryan, Liberty Capital at a great business bank. So if y'all need that, definitely encourage you to reach out. They're awesome. They've saved my hide many times. So kind of final thoughts. As we discussed, the family first really does make a benefit and help employees. The CARES Act really comes around and helps the employer keep those promises that were just made, right? Family first is the promise maker. The CARES Act is the promise keeper. It was a bipartisan of both sides, which is awesome. My encouragement for all of us is, I know we're on a Facebook Live right now, but dadgummit, let's get offline, hang out with your family. We've got an opportunity right now that we're all isolated at home. So build some memories, make a connection, realize that you can be that person. There's a I've one of our next lives that we're going to do is with a dear friend of mine, Dr. Martha Rose, and she's a licensed counselor, right? And we're going to talk about just the anxiety behind COVID-19 and all of the media that's been hitting us and the isolation of being at home and how do you deal with that, right? What are some safe, good ways to deal with that? And that's probably going to be our next live, but we're going over this and realizing that you're the solution, right? There's the story of the people stuck at home and the floods coming in and it's knee high and a big truck comes by and says, you need some help. And they're like, no, I'm waiting on God to send provisions, right? And then the water gets even higher and it gets up to, the roof and a boat comes by and says, hey, do you need some help? And they're like, no, I'm good. I'm waiting on God. And then, it's all the way up to their feet at the roof and a helicopter comes by and he's like, hey, get in now. And they're like, no, I'm waiting on God. Right. And then the next scene is they're now in heaven and they're like, God, why didn't you send help? And he's like, well, I sent a truck and I sent a boat and I sent a helicopter, right? I did send. So we have provisions, right? Even in the midst of today, there's positives and there's opportunities. And one of the provisions I want each of us to realize, just like Ryan and Stephen and Chris have been provisions in my life and hopefully a benefit today, realizing that you've got something that you can provide, whether it's helping a neighbor. Catherine was gracious enough to go get a friend's prescriptions because she can't leave home, right? Maybe it's providing it and we didn't go into their home. We just left it on their front porch. So there's things that we can do, every one of us, calling a friend, reaching out. But there's something you can do to be that truck, to be that boat, to be that helicopter and make a difference in the world around you. And hopefully that's what we're all doing in our world around us. And the number one thing we can do is just love on those around us that are in our home. So that's all I got to say, guys. Appreciate you being on the call today. I know Ryan had to jump for take care of a loan, but Steve and Chris, appreciate you. Thank you everybody for being on the call. I think let's see if there's any quick comments. It's a thank you from all. If you want the notes, make sure to type in notes in the comments and we'll get them over to you. With that said, we'll call it a day. All right.
All right. We'll see you, Eric.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Everybody stay safe.
All right.